Welcome to Thea Awards Digital Case Studies, Segment 5. I'm Roberta Perry, and you all know how passionate I am about networking. So this week, if you haven't already had the chance to meet with other people in this space, there's no time like the present. After today's presentations, we invite you to head to the TEA Technology Lounge, hosted by CHRISTIE, to continue the conversation.
And I'm Pat McKay. Don't forget to use the digital event app to get speaker backgrounds. Now, let's welcome TEA founder Monty Lunde of Technifex, who will introduce the team from CHRISTIE that's behind this year's Thea AOA for Technical Innovation, the Eclipse 4K RGB pure laser projector, followed by a chat with TEA's 2020 Peter Chernack Distinguished Service Award honoree, Wendy Heimann-Nunes.
Thank you, Pat and Roberta, for that very kind introduction, and welcome everyone to the Block 5 of the 26th Annual Thea Awards in our new digital format. Today, I'm the host of the special sessions, and we'll be taking an in-depth look at the 2020 Thea Technical Achievement recipient, the CHRISTIE Eclipse projector. And later, I'll be talking with Wendy Heimann-Nunes, this year's recipient of the TEA Peter Chernack Distinguished Service Award. As a bit of background for those new to the Thea program, the Thea for Technical Achievement is given annually and recognizes a technology that provides improved guest safety or is of such significant benefit to storytellers, it becomes a new tool that can be used to produce even more immersive and compelling guest experiences. From VR and 3D to developments in ride systems, animation technologies, or advancements in show control, the technologies recognized at the Theas push boundaries in terms of their scope and impact within the themed entertainment industry. To give us more insights about CHRISTIE and this amazing projector, I have Brian Bamey and Larry Paul joining me today. Brian is the Executive Director of the Sales and Business Development Team for the CHRISTIE Enterprise Division and directly manages sales strategy, sales development, and solutions promotion, along with handling global sponsorships with key clients around the world. Brian also works directly with the product management team as they develop products with specific attention to the themed entertainment, destination, museum, and giant screen markets. Brian is also a TEA Western Division board member and serves on the events committee. Larry is Executive Director of Technology and Custom Solutions and has been with CHRISTIE for over 16 years. He's a specialist in what he calls enabling technologies. This includes simulation and visualization systems, as well as specialized high frame rate projection technologies for shooting 3D features, most recently with filmmaker Ang Lee. His themed entertainment experience dates to the 1980s and includes Landmark RoboShop, Universal Studios, and 8 years with the late Peter Chernack's company Metavision, which included working on the Space Quest Casino in Las Vegas, a 1998 Thea Award-winning project. And thank you, Brian and Larry, for taking the time to join us today. Brian, can you start things off and tell us a bit about CHRISTIE Digital?
Well, thank you very much, Monty. CHRISTIE is really honored and excited to receive this Thea Award. We've enjoyed working closely with the TEA and other industry experts for now over 10 years, bringing visual technology to the industry in ways I don't think anyone else does. We try to adopt the methodology of listening first and then engineer and design products that will simply amaze your audiences. We want you to be able to ask us the questions and then us to be able to go back and develop products that allow storytellers to tell stories in unique ways. Today, I'm very excited to be able to talk about the CHRISTIE Eclipse solution. It truly is the product that allows contrast to grow in such ways that takes down that window, that allows us to walk through and actually be in almost a 3D environment without having to wear 3D glasses. I want to introduce you to Larry Paul. Larry and I have worked together now for over 20 years, and his passion for the entertainment industry and his devotion to the TEA and bringing products and solutions to the members in ways no one else has is simply unique. I think you're really going to enjoy his presentation today because he can tell the story in a way that allows both storytellers and executives to understand the technology is not just technology, but there's theory behind the technology that allows us to really create the experiences you want to create. Without any further ado, Mr. Larry Paul.
Brian, thank you very much for that introduction. And Monty, it's truly an honor to be here, to be with the TEA today. It's a fantastic honor for me. So let's talk about what it takes to make a realistic display. To do that, we have to talk about perception, like how do we see things? So here is contrast, shading, and light. Now, this is a fairly famous optical illusion, but everyone, when you look at this, you see that A square and the B square look different, but actually they are the same exact color. There is no difference between them, but our brains see the shading and tell us something different. Same thing actually goes with color. So if you look at this cube, you'll notice there's a brown square on the top, but you'll see an orange square on the front face. But of course, when we take away all the distractions, we'll discover that it's actually two identical brown squares. So it's how we see things and how we perceive things. So what is color? Color's always been represented on a color wheel. And we've had primary colors and secondary colors and all these different ways of describing it. But the reality is color or light is really just a part of the electromagnetic spectrum. But you'll notice there is no white on the electromagnetic spectrum. Kind of curious. So let's talk about the CIE color chart. That's that little horseshoe-shaped thing on the right-hand side. Now, in that, there are three triangles. One triangle represents what's called Rec 709. That has been the industry standard for years of projection and display technology. But that only represents a small portion of that whole horseshoe shape. That horseshoe shape really represents what we see as human beings. The DCI P3 color is that middle triangle, which is what we show in cinema. But the Rec 2020 is the latest standard. The Rec 2020 standard is much closer to representing what we see as human beings. It's still not quite everything, but it's much, much closer. And to achieve that, you really have to have laser RGB projection. You can't do that with laser phosphor. And I do want to point out that laser phosphor and RGB laser projectors are not the same thing. They both use a laser, but the difference is an RGB laser versus with red, green, and blue, as opposed to a blue laser that hits a phosphor wheel that glows yellow. That's how you extract red and green. So what is the correct color? There's cinema white, and that has been one of the standards. That's what cinema color uses. But there's all these other standards. There's CIE 1976, there's XYZ and RGB, and if for those of you old enough to remember, EGA and CGA and VGA and all these different other standards, which were all trying to do color, all trying to represent color. So Star Trek is shown here because back in the 60s, they were looking for a way of showing off color TV. And so they had people dressed up in red, blue, and, well, it was supposed to be green, kind of a yellowy green. But later on, they actually went to more of a green, but it was never quite the same color, which is the nickname of NTSC. So RGB laser. Once you see RGB laser, you can't go back. It's one of those things that when you see it side by side with a Rec 709 type of projection, it's day and night and it's game over because you see things much more like you actually see them in real life. Doesn't mean all colors are always saturated, but when you look at colors in a natural way, it is much more saturated, much more natural. Now, of course, all of you are looking at this either on your TV or on your laptop or some other computer, and your device is not a Rec 2020 device. So we had to kind of create something for you that sort of simulates that. So if you look at the macaw on the left-hand side, you'll notice it is a macaw. You can see the colors, but the image on the right-hand side is so much more rich and vibrant. Now that's still Rec 709 in the reality here, but when you see that in real life, those colors are even much more vibrant. And this is kind of showing a simulation of what it looks like. Can't really show it to you because you're not in front of an RGB projection system. So color volume is something that's often misunderstood. Color has been represented as a two-dimensional chart on that CIE 1931 chart. But that only represents part of what we see. We actually see color volume in much more vivid ways as the illumination levels get brighter. So as it gets brighter and brighter, our eyes can see more colors. That's why at night, you don't see a lot of color in a dark environment. But when you go to a bright environment, then you have potential of seeing a lot more color. It's because our eyes see things. I see that color volume. So how much contrast can we perceive? Well, in the natural world, we can be on the middle of the ocean, on a ship on deck with no clouds, and it's really bright. It's really strong, intense sun. You can also be in an evening where it's really dark. It's absolutely black levels, and you have to be able to look at things, and your eyes adapt to this tremendous range. That doesn't mean we see it all at the same time, but we have a tremendous level of contrast that our eyes can adapt to. So kind of brings me to a question. Why do pirates wear eye patches? And no, it's not because they looked into the projector. It's because most people say it's because, they got poked in the eye, so they wear an eye patch. The reality is it's much more interesting than that, because when you're on the deck of a ship, as I was talking about earlier, and you're out in the middle of the ocean and you go below deck, you can't see anything. Now, this is not a big problem in today's world because we have lights inside the ship, but back in the old days, they didn't have lights inside the ship, and they may have had to go to the powder room, and I'm not talking about the restroom. I'm talking about the room where the gunpowder is kept. So if you go into the room where the gunpowder is kept with a torch, probably not good. So you need to be able to go and work in very low light. So when you flip open your eye patch, when you go under, as they showed in Mythbusters, where they had one dark adapted eye, when they flipped that eye patch up, they could actually navigate in very, very low illumination levels. But when you walk in with two bright adjusted eyes into a dark room, you can't see, and it's really, really tough. This was a really fascinating thing for me. So resolution, 4K, 8K, 32K, everyone's talking about all these numbers. What does it all mean? How many megapixels can we actually see? Well, according to Dr. Roger Clark, it's about 576 megapixels. Now, that doesn't mean we should be making displays that are 576 megapixels, but that's what our eyes perceive the world in. That's if we were to see everything. But it's important to understand resolution, and eye-limiting resolution is an important term to understand, because the resolution that you see is relative to your distance. So you actually need, for a display that's much closer to you, you need to have a much higher res display. An image that's much farther from you, to keep that same resolution, it can be a much lower resolution display just because of the way we see things. Now let's talk about frame rate. How many frames per second can we actually see? Now, some people say it's 24 or 60 or 120. That's high frame rate. Or is it 480? Or is it more? So the reason why we're at 24 frames a second is not because of the picture quality. It's actually because we needed an optical soundtrack to go with the movie. And in 1927, The Jazz Singer came out, and it was the first movie with sound, and they had to have a faster film rate than 18 or 16 frames a second or variable frame rates. They had to have a more steady rate, and 24 is fast enough to get the optical soundtrack to have the audio sound good. Well, that's great, but it has nothing to do with picture quality. So is it 60 or 120, or what is it? Well, higher frame rates give you much more realism. Our eyes actually see much closer to 900 frames per second. That doesn't mean everywhere across your entire eye, but we are capable of seeing much, much higher resolution, much, much higher frame rates. So when you look at things, there is a natural motion blur. There are things that are blurred. If you look at a propeller on an airplane, there is a point where it is just a blur. So we do tap out, but the point is it's nowhere near the 24 or 60 or even 120, but 120 is a much closer rate than we are when we're at 60 or 24. It's definitely not a linear line. It's a logarithmic curve. So I was honored to work with film director Ang Lee on this film back in 2015. A normal movie, an average movie you go see in the theater, is 53 million pixels per second. This movie was actually shot at 4K 120 per eye 3D with a full 2.2 billion pixels per second. Absolutely an incredible experience, completely different. Now, unfortunately, very few people got to see it in this format because only a few projectors on the planet can do this, and they're not in movie theaters. So those projectors we actually installed temporarily in a few movie theaters around the world, and people got to see it. Gemini Man is another movie that Ang Lee made that I worked with him that was released last year, Paramount film. It was shown also at much higher brightnesses, 120 frames per second per eye 3D, absolutely spectacular and a completely different experience, much more engaging. So HDR, we're getting closer to the subject at hand, actually. What is HDR? First of all, HDR is an incredibly overused term. Everything, people associate HDR with all sorts of things. They put it on, like it's another 3-letter acronym that they stick on things. And people have seen HDR photography, and some people love it, some people don't because it doesn't look natural. There's all these different things. But HDR, people talk about it with TVs and all this different stuff. The reality is, HDR really is, what it means is bright things are really bright and dark things are really dark. And details can be seen in both. That is the best summary of what HDR truly is, not just something that says HDR, but something that is HDR. So why does HDR matter? Well, here you see 3 nebulas, and just like the bird example I showed earlier, we have an example on the left-hand side, which represents a standard contrast type of display system. The one in the middle is a better improved contrast, but still not the same. You'll notice the image on the right also looks more colorful. Now, granted, this is a simulation, but when you see it side by side, there's no comparison. What the Eclipse does is on the right-hand side. It has absolutely black blacks, so those stars really pop and they really stand out, and the colors are much more vibrant. And that's really what this is all about. So the specular highlights, when you look into someone's eye, you see little glints in their eye, or you look at a car's headlights or rims or a chrome ball on a flagpole, all those type of things, all those become much more realistic. Yes, you can tell what they are if you don't have the specular highlights, but it doesn't look like you're really there. It doesn't look like you're looking out of a window. It looks like you're watching a projection system, which is not what we're looking for. We're trying to transport audiences to a new location. So specular highlights, this is another example. You can see that in all cases, you can tell that that's a motor. But when the specular highlights are in more and more detail, it starts to look more like a photograph and less like a computer model. So bit depth, really quick. Bottom line is bit depth used to be acceptable at 8-bit. As you increase the quality of your content, you have to increase the bit depth to at least 10-bit or 12-bit color, because you need to be able to do that. Otherwise, you see a lot of artifacts, which again take you out of your scene, out of your sense of realism. All this sort of brings it around to the CHRISTIE Eclipse, the real reason why we're here. The CHRISTIE Eclipse is truly a unique product. It's a 6-chip DLP projector. It is not like any other projector on the market. Other projectors on the market are 3-chip or 1-chip, or there's LCD or other technologies. But no other projector for this market does 6 chips to be able to create these kind of amazing images. So it really does that contrast ratio, like Monty was talking about, up to 20 million to 1 contrast ratio. Absolutely incredible blacks being black. Now, when you're in a dark ride that is truly light controlled, you can actually create an experience that is so dark that you can have people not realize that there's a projector in front of them, or there's a special effect going on that's actually a full projected image, because they have no idea where the gray level is. They don't see it as a projector. They see it as actually something there. So it really does an amazing job at creating these spectaculars. So Rec 2100, I didn't talk about that earlier. Rec 2100 is the same color of volume as Rec 2020, but the difference is with Rec 2100, it includes contrast and frame rate and other factors that make this much more dynamic. And the CHRISTIE Eclipse is truly a unique product that far exceeds the contrast spec of Rec 2100 being only 200,000 to 1. We're talking about around 20 million to 1. So it's a completely different level of contrast, and blacks are truly black, and it's just exceptional. The high frame rate capability, the CHRISTIE Eclipse is also capable of full 4K 120 frames per second. And that is absolutely incredible to look at. So there's another side benefit of the Eclipse. Projectors in the past have always had, for a single image, you have one projector, that's fine. But when you have an array of projectors, you now start stacking projectors and you're covering each portion to get more resolution. You're covering each portion on the screen a little bit more and more. With that, you get double the brightness levels in one zone or 4 times the levels in another zone. And then you either have to do optical filters or increase your ambient light, which kills all your contrast, or you have to elevate the black levels and do all these tricks. The Eclipse doesn't need any of that. So everyone here is really in the business of facilitating illusionists. And it's really about creating realism and creating reality. And all those factors, and it includes everything to do with lighting and how you capture the content and camera movement and focus, and all these things can just transport your guests into places that they've never been before. And what we're trying to do is get people out of their homes, and really everyone wants to get out of their homes right now, but transport them to another world or have an interaction experience that feels like you're actually talking to a person, not watching a video of a person. It's really, really different. So the laser RGB is key for that. And we actually make a lot of products that are laser RGB for that exact reason. The CHRISTIE Eclipse with true HDR is black being black, and that gives you a sense where you can project an object or something that is just truly unbelievable when you compare it to a regular projection system. So the high frame rate capabilities, all these things, the detail and clarity, and it's really putting it all together from the creation of the content to the display of the content to the facility. All these things really create a system, and that's what's so important. Carter Emhart said it really well. Blacks are blacker than he's ever seen in a full dome show, and it's the blackness of space. And it's really just amazing when you get to see this. When you look up at the stars, people tell me that they thought it was 3D because you don't see the reference. So you just see a star floating in space. And when you have a volumetric model, which is a 3D model, it just transports you and you feel like the screen is not there and you're just absolutely where you want it to be. It's the holy grail, as Emhart says. Really designed to thrill. We have a whole suite of different solutions, and we're really excited to be able to present this stuff to you. And I thank you very much. And Monty, back to you.
Thank you, Larry, for giving a fantastic presentation about a truly incredible projector. I've seen segments of Gemini Man that were projected using the Eclipse and was absolutely blown away by how quickly I was pulled into the action. The visual clarity was really, truly off the charts. So congratulations on such an amazing product. We have a little bit of time remaining, so I'd like to just ask a few questions. And Larry, if I could start with you, why the 6th chip in the Eclipse projector, and what sort of engineering challenge did that present?
Well, 6 chips, as I mentioned, is really a unique application for this. And actually, once we had the concept down, it still took us about 5 years with about 90 engineers over that 5-year period, not all working full time. But it took a lot of effort and a lot of great engineering expertise. We have an amazing engineering team, but the 6 chips actually work with each other. They actually work to, and that's how you get the extra contrast. And that's why no other projector has that kind of performance, because no other projector is built with a 6-chip architecture. It really is a unique platform. And like I said, it was not a trivial development. It was a huge investment on our part, and we really created it for this market. That's why we have it.
Okay. Well, to both of you, there are many laser projectors on the market. What makes the Eclipse projector eclipse other laser projectors?
Well, it is different, because of the 6-chip, but it's because RGB, we make a whole suite of RGB projectors. And we've been doing this actually since 2012, 2013, when we launched our first generation of RGB laser projection. RGB laser really enables you to see the better color, but it also enabled the Eclipse to be able to produce that kind of contrast. We could never have done that kind of contrast with a lamp-based projector. There's qualities of the laser light that really enable that to happen. And you can't do it with laser phosphor either. It's something that is truly enabled because of RGB laser, and that's when that development really started.
I think if I can add to that, on the laser phosphor projectors, we make laser phosphor projectors as well. And they work very well in the enterprise industry for classrooms or in boardroom settings. But if you're really looking to create that experience that you can get nowhere else, RGB laser is really the answer.
So Brian, you're absolutely right. Laser phosphor projectors are a mainstay, and they're an important part of the marketplace. But when you're trying to create that extra special image quality, when you're trying to create that extra detail, that's where laser phosphor projectors are really left behind and in a different class than an RGB laser projector. So we do make a variety of different products. You're absolutely right, and they're all great for their applications. But it's really the RGB and especially the Eclipse. The Eclipse is not for every application. It would be great everywhere, but most environments can't take advantage of it. But when you're in a dark ride or you're in a special environment like a planetarium or a giant screen cinema or a special venue that can really take advantage of those things, that's really where it makes a difference. So there's a reason why we make a whole variety of different products in our portfolio, because you have to have the right products for the right application.
Well, so in a broader sense, how does the Eclipse enable new and expanded storytelling opportunities?
Well, part of the way you do that is by having those specular highlights and those details that really create the sense of immersion, and you are taken away from that moment of I'm looking at a projected image and brings you into I'm actually face to face with someone. I mean, lately everyone's been living our virtual lives, working at home and living on computer screens. But you can tell the difference when someone's actually in front of you versus a display screen. When you have a product like the Eclipse, it really just enables those extra details, those extra clues, like the specular highlights in the eyes and all those little details that suddenly make you feel like, and the higher frame rates make you feel like you're actually talking to someone face to face, as opposed to something else where you're looking at a projection system or a display system. It's just, that's really the kind of difference that you have with the Eclipse. It really is quite different.
I know a few years ago we talked about being able to create projection that made it look like you were looking through a window. And what I really think Eclipse does today is actually takes that glass out of the window and allows that three-dimensional feeling and experience of immersion that is really quite different, because black is now truly black. So when we're looking at attractions that are where we kind of fly you out into space, you can imagine what you could be able to do with that type of technology.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's really exciting at the Hayden Planetarium, they do their shows during the day, but at night they actually bring in scientists and they actually do scientific study, and they've had astronauts in there, and astronauts have been quoted by saying, "This is the closest I've ever been to outer space without being in outer space," because the blackness of space is exceptionally black. And that's what this really represents. And you can see stars and dimensions and movements and all those kind of details. And that's really what this is about. So I've even seen examples from the Apollo 17 moon landing, where they re-digitized the Hasselblad images and they did photogrammetry. And you can even see the details in the footprints in the lunar soil. Absolutely incredible detail. And those are the kind of things that we enable with this projection technology. So if you can do it for the scientific community and make it more realistic, you can also make it more for our industry in the themed entertainment world as well, and tell great stories.
Well, it's amazing that scientists are actually getting more information out of old footage just because of the power of this projector. That's truly incredible. So, Brian, do you see CHRISTIE, or does CHRISTIE envision themselves as more of a products company or a solutions-oriented company, or is there a difference?
Well, I think there is. And I think, there are products, but we're always focused on the solution. Really trying to solve the customer's problem is what I preach to my team and really try to focus on. And as we said at the beginning, It's all about listening first and then being able to solve a problem. And to do that, it takes more than just a product. It takes a solution. Now, sometimes a solution can be a product, but the product is designed to meet and exceed any of the questions that a customer has or a problem that they have, that they really want to be able to do things they couldn't do before or wanted to be able to create new experiences in ways they've never thought of before.
Well, and having the right tool to solve a challenge is critical
Right.
to being successful. So the fact that you have a wide array of options is important. Brian, question for you. You know, and you've been involved with CHRISTIE long enough to be a part of this. I mean, CHRISTIE's been a fantastic sponsor of the TEA for a decade. Do you see the relationship between your company and TEA members as helping influence the development of new technologies and the use of them?
Absolutely, Monty. I've been with CHRISTIE now 18 years. I was the one, 10 years ago who said we really need to engage the TEA in a more meaningful way. I've asked our members, and Larry Howard is not here with us today, but Larry has also been a TEA director, and we really want to be engaged with the TEA, not to just be a sponsor of things, but to really learn from the folks who are so passionate. If anything, I've learned over COVID and being on the Zoom calls with everyone, really trying to come up with great ideas on how we can still entertain and still do things. It's been simply amazing, and we really, really enjoy that experience. But it really also helps us learn how we can develop products and how we can be more of the solution for the industry. And I don't see really that changing. I just really enjoy our relationship, and it really makes, I think, us much better at what we do.
Well, thank you both for coming and talking with us today and sharing the details about the Eclipse that make it truly a Thea-worthy technology. It's been a pleasure talking to you both, and it really is a spectacular projector that's going to have a huge impact on our industry.
Monty, thank you very much,
Well,
and thank you to the TEA for this incredible honor. It's really a thrill to be here, and I hope that you have a little bit more understanding of what goes on behind the scenes to create these kind of fantastic experiences. But thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Welcome back to part 2 of our special segments. Since its inception 9 years ago, it's been my sincere pleasure to present the TEA Peter Chernack Distinguished Service Award to the recipients at the Thea Gala. This award honors those who provide service to the TEA and our membership above and beyond the call of duty. Times are different, so TEA leadership decided an interview with this year's Service Award recipient, Wendy Heimann-Nunes, would provide a more personal impression of Wendy's life and contributions to our industry. Wendy has been affiliated with the TEA for over 20 years, starting when she was lead counsel at the Oz Entertainment Company in 1998. And later when she joined Universal Creative as head of business and legal affairs. After a 4-year run with Universal, Wendy left and started her own legal practice, which has grown into the Nolan Hyman Law Firm. She now advises many TEA members as clients. Wendy's support of TEA events, seminars, panels, and the industry at large has been exceptional. She has advised the TEA pro bono for nearly 10 years and been a speaker at numerous summit conferences and at SATE, discussing the ins and outs of transactional law as it pertains to doing business in themed entertainment. Coupled with her tell-it-like-it-is personality, she continues to help suppliers and vendors navigate the challenges of working in this industry. Wendy has done this all while raising 2 kids who are now 14 and 15. She's also developed an unusual stress-reducing passion that she's agreed to share with us later in this interview. Thank you, Wendy, for your many years of service to the TEA, support of TEA members, and for taking the time to do this interview.
Monty, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone at the TEA. This is an incredible honor. I'm humbled, I'm embarrassed, but I'm incredibly appreciative.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time to do this. So to start things, there's a strong thread in your professional history that associates you with themed entertainment and themed entertainment related companies and projects. Not the typical path for a well-educated attorney. Can you tell us a little bit about your childhood and what sparked your interest in themed entertainment?
Sure. In preparing for our conversation, I really had to take a step back and think about what was it that really was the genesis of my passion in this industry. And I went back and I looked at my pictures from Kittyland. I'm from Skokie, Illinois. It's a suburb of Chicago. And there was a little amusement park that wasn't so little to me. It was actually my world. It was called Kittyland. And I saw some photos from my kindergarten birthday party there. And it really touched me because it made me really focus on where my passion for this industry came from. At the time, my mom had finished her radiation therapy for she had had cancer. And so at a very young age, I had a very intense trauma. And Kittyland, for me, when I look at those photos and I see my face, there was such joy and such immersion in another reality, a reality of fun, of childhood joy, being with my friends. And Kittyland meant the world to me. It was truly my favorite place on earth. And I think I share that with a lot of other people in the industry who have similar memories, whether they're Disneyland, Great America. There's something about being in an immersive world like that as a kid that really moved me and made me appreciate creating opportunities for people to escape and to really experience joy.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I remember my first roller coaster ride at Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk, and just what a blast that place was. It was not the nicest park in the world in terms of being in the 70s, but it was a lot of fun. So, sticking with your parents as a topic here, they were both refugees from Nazi Germany during World War II, but I guess they actually met in Chicago. Can you tell us a little bit about them and how they affected your perception about being in service to others?
Sure. So my folks escaped Nazi Germany, thankfully, in 1938 and 39, and they settled in Skokie, which is famous for the proposed Nazi marches in the 1970s. I grew up in a home that every day was grateful for the family who sponsored my entire family to get out of Germany. At the time, in order to emigrate, you had to have a sponsor. You had to have cash in the bank, so you weren't a ward of the state. And the Carl and Mildred Meyer family paid for 13 of my family to get out. And every day I looked at their photo. My dad had their portrait on our wall. And I was told, were it not for the kindness and the philanthropy of these individuals, we wouldn't exist. And so I was raised with a true pay it forward. You have to pay it forward. That's your debt to the world. And so service was just a part of our lives. My parents were incredibly philanthropic, active in various organizations. And for me, it wasn't even a question. Part of my life was destined to give back. It's not even a conscious thing. It's just, you do it. You do it because that's the debt that you owe. And that's what your contribution needs to be to the world.
Well, that notion of paying it forward is what advances our whole society. It's huge. So speaking of advancement, moving forward in your life, you went to Northwestern University and you took a class called Rhetoric and Contemporary Culture. An unusual name for a class, but apparently that really resonated with you and informed your career. Can you tell us a little bit about what in particular was so profound about that particular course?
It really, honestly, that course changed the trajectory of my career. Sometimes I wonder if it was a good thing or not, because it landed me in this wacky industry of themed entertainment. I went to Northwestern. I knew I wanted to be in entertainment. I wasn't talented enough to be talent, but I knew that I could support talent in some way, whether it was as an advocate or as a businesswoman. And I had thought of entertainment as television, film, music. This course, we dissected rhetoric, the means of persuasion, in a 360-degree way. We looked at contemporary things like retail, themed dining, television shows. I studied the Northwestern Athletic Department, and we broke it apart in terms of every degree of communication, the colors, the atmosphere, the language. All the devices used 360 degrees to persuade an audience to do something. And that blew me away, because all of a sudden, persuasion and communication was no longer just unidirectional or bidirectional, but it was 360 degrees. You could employ everything in your environment to tell a story, to persuade, to create a narrative. And once I realized that, I was done. I knew that I needed to pursue entertainment from a 360-degree perspective.
Immersive entertainment. Well, speaking of immersive entertainment, you moved on to law school, and you told me that you suffered from a bit of a legally blonde syndrome while you were there. Tell us a little bit about what that was and how you navigated that situation.
So after Northwestern, I was a talent agent for a couple of years in Chicago, and I was bopping around Chicago with my cowboy boots and stirrup pants. You know, it was the 80s. And I decided, though, that in order for me to really be taken seriously, because for some reason, I was never really taken seriously. So I thought, I'm going to go to law school. I knew I could get into a good one. I didn't know I could get into such a good one, so I was fortunate. And so I show up to University of Chicago in my talent agent 80s, accoutrement, and people kind of look at me like, who is she? Why is she here? And I was really filled with a lot of insecurity. But it turned out to be an amazing experience. And the reason why I emphasize the Legally Blonde movie is when I saw that movie, it really resonated with me, because it underscored Elle Wood was successful because she stayed true to herself. She knew that the hair dye couldn't survive the shower, and she knew that the guy was talking about shoes or whatever it was. She brought something to bear that was uniquely hers. And when I was in law school, I brought a voice to bear that was uniquely mine, that turned out to be appreciated. And so for the younger people out there who are afraid of being true to themselves, I would say, don't be afraid. Who you are is your greatest strength. It's what you bring to the world. Lean into it, because it's what's going to make you successful. And that's what I learned at the University of Chicago. Being the whack job that I was, it actually helped me be successful as opposed to hold me back.
Well, you survived it, you graduated, and I guess you practiced law for a short time, but then you landed the plum job, and moving into entertainment, you landed the plum job of executive director at the Chicago Theater, which I don't know that even you expected. Tell us some of the key takeaways of that first professional experience and how that shaped who you are today.
Yeah, just another monumental time in my career that really set me on another incredible trajectory. I was practicing law at a large firm, intellectual property law, but I was very involved in the theater community in Chicago because that's what I love. And the Chicago Theater had just been recently reorganized out of bankruptcy. The city was its largest creditor. And the mayor, for some reason, in appointing the executive director, felt that there needed to be an attorney. Don't ask me why. It made no sense, but that was his judgment. And there weren't a lot of attorneys who were so focused on theater at that time in Chicago. So at a stupid young age, with very little experience, I had the tremendous opportunity to be the executive director of the Landmark Theater. And it was there that we started working with the Disney Development Corp. They were in the process of revitalizing Times Square, and they looked at the Chicago Theater as their anchor for Chicago redevelopment. And that's when I woke up to this notion of, wait a second, you could be a multi-million dollar corporation in entertainment and be interested in placemaking and creating mixed-use real estate development, using entertainment to revitalize urban areas and create places for people. It didn't even know that that existed. And it was at that point that I said, this is what I want to do. This is 360-degree entertainment on a massive scale. So it was remarkable, and got to meet Michael Ovitz, which was fun. And it changed the trajectory of my career.
Well, indeed it did. After a 2-year run as lead counsel at the Oz Entertainment Company, you moved on to Universal Creative and became the head of business and legal affairs. Quite a significant move in a fairly short period of time. But, as a woman in a very male-dominated industry and profession, how did you successfully navigate that sort of situation?
Well, first of all, I don't know that I would call it successful. I think that remains to be seen, or that's subjective. And the reason I say that is because I was an HR nightmare for my bosses. And the reason I was an HR nightmare was because, first of all, unbeknownst to a lot of people, I spent the first 16 years of my life looking and acting like a little boy. I was a tomboy. I was mistaken as a boy. I really thought of myself as a boy, and always had guy friends. So for me, navigating a male-oriented environment, it just meant being one of the guys. The problem with being one of the guys as a woman in corporate America, especially as a woman who's a professional, is that being one of the guys was oftentimes misconstrued as not necessarily the most appropriate way to be. And so I found myself functioning within a double standard, and it was difficult. It was difficult to navigate. I purposely did it to stay true to myself and to let the guys that I was working with know that I was one of them and they could be bawdy and wouldn't bother me. But the problem was when I responded to it or when I got involved in it, I was subjected to a different standard. And that's when HR would knock on my door. And so, it was the realization, and I think there are women out there that can appreciate this, that sometimes as a woman, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. That's why, for me, whether I navigated it successfully or not, I think is a question mark. I think you'd have to ask the folks at Universal Creative.
Well, I would say you were very successful at it, and I'm sure it was a challenging but interesting predicament to be in. I know that you were there for 4 years, and then you left during a period of pretty difficult circumstances. You really did hit a personal bottom, but then you came out of that reinventing yourself. I know it's a little bit sensitive, but can you tell us a little bit about that period and kind of what was the bridge for you to moving on with your life and your career?
Yeah, it was remarkable. So long story short, I'd been commuting between LA and Orlando. When Creative moved to Orlando, my husband's job was maintained in LA, and we had been going through a lot of fertility treatments, not very successfully. Graciously, Mark Woodbury understood my desire to come back to LA. Universal graciously kept me on in LA. I miraculously got pregnant all on my own, and the natural tenure of my tenure at Universal was coming to an end right when I was going to have our baby. Her name was Isabella, and so I left Universal and prepared to have Isabella, and unfortunately we lost her at 7 months. And it was the most devastating experience that I ever experienced, and it brought me to my knees. Wasn't sure I was going to survive. And it was at that point that I had to rebuild. And I really had to take stock of life, what life was all about, how did I want to live the rest of it. And I decided that I could never work for someone ever again, that I would have to be an entrepreneur. And I also decided that my long love for drumming, something I wanted to do my whole life. But as a nice Jewish girl growing up in the 1970s, we played clarinet and piano, not drums, that I was going to take drums. And so she brought me entrepreneurship and drumming, two of the things that bring me the greatest joy and have changed my life the most dramatically. And so my message to folks out there who are struggling during this pandemic is, if you find yourself really brought down and challenged, sometimes when you're brought down to the studs, you have an opportunity to think about the house you want to rebuild. And I would really encourage you to rebuild your house in a way that is so consistent with who you are and what you want and what brings you joy, and stay to that. Don't listen to outside influences. Don't think about what society thinks you should do or wants you to do. You have one life, and make that choice to rebuild your house in a way that's consistent with everything you are and you want.
Well, I think that's a very powerful message, and that's true for all of us. I know, what you went through must have been just terribly devastating, but you were able to come out of that. I know many of us have experienced personal loss and found a way to survive it, and not only survive, but thrive. And I think it's great that you've reinvented yourself. Tell us a little bit more about this drumming. That's something that is an unusual passion that would come out of that personal situation. What is it about music or drumming, and what is it that you do with that now that relieves some of the stress in your life?
Well, first of all, I want to take issue with the notion of reinventing. I didn't reinvent myself. I found myself because, again, these are things that were in me that I just let out. And the drumming is kind of crazy. I always wanted to play drums, but again, was told girls don't do that. So in an effort to bring some form of joy into my life, I started taking drum lessons, and I was told you should play with other musicians. And so I put an ad out on Craigslist that said, desperate 40-year-old housewife hack drummer looking for other desperate 40-year-old hack musicians to form a desperate housewife hack musician band. And I got an email back from a band called Crinoline that said, we're in our 40s. We think you're hilarious. We want to audition you. We love your sense of humor. I wrote back, I think you're mistaking a sense of humor for fact. They wrote back, you're hilarious. You have to come to this audition. So I went. It was the first time I'd ever played with other musicians. I left the audition with bloody palms because I'd gripped the stick so tight because I was so nervous. I was glad I got that over with. I fully expected never to hear from them again. They called the next day offering me the drummer position, and my husband said, okay, they want you to fund the tour, right? What's the deal? Because he didn't believe that I would get the gig. And I've been playing with them ever since. We are a indie punk band. We play all original music. I'm a punk drummer. And we play, our favorite place to play is called the Double Down Saloon in Las Vegas, home of Ash Juice. It's the longest running dive bar in all of America now that CBGB's closed. And I just love it. And I'm a total whack job. What I lack in drumming talent, I make up for in showmanship. And it's a joy. It's my flow. And it's a good thing I didn't take drumming as a kid, because I'd probably be a professional musician right now, which is not an easy life to live. So.
Well, when this COVID situation is over, you have to send us all your travel schedule and where you're going to be playing next, so that you can have a few TEA members join in the audience and cheer you on.
Yeah, I have such a hard time. People always say, why don't you tell us about your gigs? And it freaks me out. Andy Mandel, my first boss at Universal, surprised me. He heard about a gig and he surprised me. And it was the only time I told my band I refused to play. They were like, you gotta play. You can't just not play. And Andy, after that, has come to several of my gigs. So I'm very appreciative. Shout out to Andy.
Well, like I say, you'll have to post your travel schedule and let us know where your next gig is going to be.
Yeah, it's Crinoline, and we're at crinolinetheband.com if you guys want to look us up.
All right. So circling back to themed entertainment, you seem to have a real passion and compassion for those who work in themed entertainment. It's another attribute that's not really common amongst attorneys, at least not ones that I've interacted with. What makes you so passionate about helping the supplier community?
I think the reason that I became an attorney was because I've always been an advocate for people who are not necessarily able to defend themselves in the way that they should. But I realized that my heart was really in representing folks who had less leverage, and that it would really make me happy to even the playing field.
Well, and even at you do, those of us that are on the supplier side appreciate the work that you do for us and your advocacy. It's much needed and very well respected.
Well, and Monty, if I can interrupt for just 1 second, I do think that evening the playing field at the end of the day helps everyone in the ecosystem. I think ultimately the buyers of services, the big corporations and whatnot, are much better served long term when the vendor community is in a healthier spot and a better footing. I really think it's a win-win for everyone in the ecosystem to have a more balanced environment transactionally.
Agreed. So speaking of the long term, tell us a little bit about what you see in your personal crystal ball relative to the future of themed entertainment and this industry in general.
So I'm going to sound deluded, and I know people think, God, she's such a cheerleader. Is it sincere? And it truly is sincere. So, when I took that class at Northwestern, that was in the 80s. And then it was the early 90s that the experience economy became the buzzword, right? And then in 2002 or 2003, Minority Report, the Spielberg movie, came out. And he worked with futurists that were really anticipating what the future was going to look like in terms of immersion. And immersion is where it's at. And it's only going to grow. As personal wealth in the world and the standard of living increases, people are going to want to consume more experiences. As technology becomes more immersive in nature and accessible, the demand for these immersive experiences, whether it's for entertainment purposes, whether it's for educational purposes, training purposes, activating real estate, whatever it is, consumers are going to continue to demand more and more immersion. And who's better to provide the narrative and the technical basis for immersion than the TEA members? We have owned this space from the very beginning. And so, again, I would really encourage everyone in the TEA community, lean into your strength as immersive storytellers or as immersive technology providers or as immersive producers or as immersive narrative creators. Don't be afraid of it. Don't let the entertainment industry convince you that you're the redheaded stepchild. We're not the redheaded stepchildren anymore. We are where it's at. Let's own it. And I think once this pandemic passes, there's going to be tremendous pent-up demand. Capital is going to need to spend some money. And for those of us who survive, and that's a tall order, this is a very difficult period for our industry, but those of us who survive, I think, are going to encounter a tremendous amount of opportunity, and I'm excited to be a part of it.
Well, I couldn't agree more, and truer words have never been spoken. I think if we all get through this, there'll be another renaissance for our entire industry, those of us that figure out a way to make it through it, and that's obviously the current challenge. So before we conclude this interview, is there anything else that you'd like to share with everyone?
I would. First of all, I'm really touched by this honor. When Michael Mercadante called me, I was floored. I was also, it made me feel old, I will say that. And I was just so honored. And I was letting my friends know about the award. And one of my best friends from college started to cry. And I said, Andrea, why are you crying? And she said, Peter and Rebecca are our best friends. Peter was one of our best friends. I can't believe you're getting an award in his name. And so I said, could you please introduce me to Rebecca? Because if I'm going to accept this award in Peter's honor, I need to know who he is. And so I've had the opportunity to get to know Peter through Rebecca. And he was such a lovely person. He was such a committed person to our industry. And he was just a philanthropic, giving person in general. He was an incredible volunteer at his synagogue. He was a great dad. I've heard what a wonderful, lovely friend he was to people. And so I'm just so touched that I can carry Peter's legacy on and have this award in his honor. And I'm just very grateful for the opportunity to get to know the Chernacks better, but most importantly, to understand the spirit in which this award is being bestowed. And I hope that my service to the community only grows, and that this isn't a capstone. It's just an intermission to the next act.
Well, Peter was a very, very dear friend of mine for decades. He was one of the cornerstones of the TEA. And I know he'd be very proud of you and of you receiving this recognition and this time and this place in our history. And it's very important that we recognize those that do for others. This whole notion of giving to others, paying it forward, and you're the embodiment of that. I mean, we've learned a little bit about your history and where that comes from. And I just want to thank you very much for sharing all that with us, both the good, the bad, and the crazy drumming.
Oh, you ain't seen nothing yet, Monty. You ain't seen nothing yet.
We're looking forward to actually seeing you with drums in front of you. I'm used to seeing you in your attorney persona, so seeing you as a punk rock drummer would be a nice alternative. Anyway. Awesome. Wendy, thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time with us, for sharing your story, and congratulations on the well-deserved recognition as the 2020 TEA Peter Chernack Distinguished Service Award recipient. You are truly exemplary, and we thank you so much for everything you've done for the TEA as an organization and for the membership.
Thank you so much, Monty, and thank you to the TEA. I really, really appreciate it from the bottom of my heart.
In our next case study episode, airing on October 22nd, the fabulously charismatic Free Forgedam of Maikotu will present Thea AOAs for Attractions Case Studies from Wonderbox at Paradise City in Incheon, Hagrid's Magical Creatures Motorbike Adventure from Universal Orlando, and the delightful limited budget Popcorn Revenge at Wallaby, Belgium.
See you soon.
Thank you, everybody.